Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Erie. My name is Kelly Armour, and I'm the co-chair of the Sunday Services Committee. And I'm very delighted to do this service this morning. So if you have a chalice or a bell, make sure you've got them handy because you'll get to use them. And let's see, we'll start with the bell ringing. The bells call us. With the sound of bells, we welcome stranger and friend to a time of mindfulness. And everybody, if you have a bell, unmute yourself and ring it. One of my favorite parts of the week is hearing that beautiful, strange cacophony. Our welcoming song, which is composed by Hal Walker with words from the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Golden, Colorado, will be presented by Brian Head.
Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you.
Indeed, we are all welcome, no matter who we are, whom we love, where we come from. Our chalice lighting, so if you have a candle or a chalice, comes from the great Maya Angelou, as she discusses the art of writing, but really it applies to any kind of creative pursuit. We write for the same reason that we walk, talk, climb mountains, or swim oceans, because we can. We have some impulse within us that makes us want to explain ourselves to other human beings. And let us light the chalice in the spirit of explanation and creativity. Our prelude by Jackson Froman is by Yasuaki Iwata, Cass's theme. Jackson? Thank you, Jackson. Hey, Dixie, can you make me co-host? So this story, I heard this story I heard this story read as part of a podcast and a couple of years ago, and I was very much taken with it. And I've been thinking about it for years, quite literally. And when the Sunday Services Committee decided to take on the theme of perfection and imperfection for the month of February, I thought this story would be an interesting one to focus on. So it's written by Stephen Millhauser, and it is called In the Reign of Herod IV. In the reign of Herod IV, there lived at court a maker of miniatures who was celebrated for the uncanny perfection of his work. Not only were the objects of his art pleasing to look at, but the astonishment increased as the observer, bending closer, saw that a passionate care had been lavished on the smallest details. It was said that no matter how closely you examined one of the master's little pieces, you always discovered some further wonder. Among the many tasks of this artist was replacing the furnishings of the toy palace, which the king had inherited from his father. The famous toy palace, with its more than 600 rooms, its dungeons and secret passageways, its gardens and courtyards and orchards, rose to the height of a man's chest and occupied its own chamber across from the king's library. In return for his duties, the maker of miniatures was given a private apartment in the palace, as well as an ermine robe that entitled him to take part in official ceremonies. He was assisted by two youthful apprentices. They roughed out the larger miniatures, such as cupboards and canopy beds, fired the little earthenware bowls in a special kiln, applied the first coat of lacquer to objects made of wood, and saved precious time for the master by fetching from the palace workshops pieces of ivory, coppice, lapis, and beechwood. But the apprentices were not permitted to attempt the more difficult labors of the miniaturist's art, such as carving the dragon heads at the feet of table legs, or forging the minuscule copper keys that turned the locks of drawers and chests. One day, after the completion of an arduous and exhilarating task, he had made a basket of brilliantly lifelike red and green apples, each no larger than the pit of a cherry. And as a finishing touch, he had placed on the stem of one apple a perfectly reproduced copper fly. The maker of miniatures felt in himself a stirring of restlessness. It wasn't the first time he had experienced such stirrings at the end of a long task, but lately the odd internal itching had become more insistent. The basket had been unusually satisfying to make because it had presented him with a hierarchy of sizes. The basket itself, composed of separate slats of boxwood bound with copper wire, then the apples, and at last the fly. The tiny fly, with its precisely rendered wings, had caused him the most difficulty and the most joy. It occurred to him that there was no particular reason to stop at the fly. Suddenly, he was seized by an inner trembling. Why had he never thought of it before? How was it possible? At this thought, he felt a deep, guilty excitement, as if he had come to a forbidden door at the end of a private corridor, and heard, as he slowly turned the key, a sound of distant music. He set out to make an apple basket the size of one of the original apples. The new wooden apples, each with a stem and two leaves, were so small that he was able to carve them only with the aid of an enlarging glass. But even as he struggled pleasurably over the apple, he realized that he was dreaming of the fly, the impossible fly that, as it turned out, was visible only as a speck on the minuscule stem, though it was perfect in every detail when viewed through the glass. The king, who had praised the original fly, looked at the new basket of apples with astonished delight. When the master invited him to observe the apples through the glass, the king drew in his breath, appeared to be about to speak, and suddenly clapped his hands sharply, whereupon the chamberlain strode in. The king instructed him to view the miniature fly through his lens. The chamberlain, a cold and imperious man, gave a harsh gasp. By the next morning, the story of the invisible fly was known throughout the palace. So this is the end of the first part of the story. There's broken it up into 4 parts, so you can kind of let it digest throughout this morning's presentation. So I am now going to ask Brian Head to lead the Universal Covenant, followed by the Bond of Union. Unmute yourself, Brian.
There we go. We are Unitarian Universalists, a people of open minds, loving hearts, and welcoming hands. We care for the earth and each other. And then the regular bond, the bond of union. We unite ourselves together for the study and practice of morality and religion as interpreted by the growing thought and noblest lives of humanity, believing that we may thereby prove helpful one to another and promote the cause of truth, righteousness, and love in the world.
Thank you, Brian. The second part of the story will be read by Pat Lori.
With new zest, the middle-aged but still vigorous master devoted himself to a series of miniatures that in every way surpassed his finest efforts of the past. From the pit of a cherry, he carved a ring of 36 elephants, each holding in its trunk the tail of the elephant before it. Every elephant possessed a pair of nearly invisible tusks carved out of ivory. One day, the master presented to the king a saucer on which stood an inverted ebony thimble. When the king picked up the thimble, he discovered beneath it a meticulous reproduction of the northwest wing of his toy palace, with 26 rooms fully furnished, including a writing table with ostrich claw legs and a gold birdcage containing a nightingale. Scarcely had the maker of miniatures completed the thimble palace when he felt a new burst of restlessness. Once embarked on his downward voyage, would he ever be able to stop? Besides, wasn't it plain that the tiny palace, though but partially visible to the unaided eye, revealed itself too readily? And he proposed to himself a plunge beneath the surface of the visible, the creation of a detailed world wholly inaccessible to the naked eye. He quickly recognized the need for more powerful lenses, more subtle tools. From the court carpenter, he ordered a pair of complex gripping devices that held his hand still and steadied his fingers. This was no work for an old man, he thought. No, or for a young man either, but only for someone in the full vigor of his middle years. His first masterpiece in the realm of the invisible was a stag with branching antlers. Through a powerful glass, he watched the invisible sharpen into the visible, the head twisted to one side, the mouth slightly open, the lips drawn back to reveal the teeth. He carved it and painted it down to the last detail, tooth and hoof and pale inner ear. And it was said that if you looked very closely through the enlarging glass, you could distinguish the amber irises from the bright black pupils. No sooner had he finished the stag, he embarked on a far more challenging task, an invisible garden, modeled at first on the king's own palace gardens, but quickly developing its own more elaborate design. During the early stages, a sudden windy draft destroyed a week's worth of work. With the aid of the court carpenter, the maker of miniatures constructed a teakwood box with a sloping top in which was set a square magnifying lens. Two panels in the side of the box slid smoothly up and down so that a pair of hands might be inserted, and the square lens, attached to a system of rods and screws, could be raised and lowered. The intricate and delicate garden, protected from disturbing currents of air, grew slowly until it contained dozens of 12-sided flower beds, 14 varieties of fruit tree with individual leaves, a system of crossing paths paved with ebony and ivory, onyx fountains carved with legendary creatures, snails under stones. Although the king expressed wonder and amazement at the garden seen through the glass and praised the master's conquest of a new world, he asked many questions about the lens and the teakwood box, as if he suspected them of working a spell. At last the king permitted himself to wonder whether his maker of miniatures might not soon return to the visible miracle of his exquisite palace furniture. In the king's voice, the master heard a tone of reproach. As he explained the apparatus and adjusted the lens, it seemed to him that by venturing beyond the visible world, he had embarked on a voyage more perilous than he had known.
Yes, thus ends part 2 of the story. Now is the time in the service for our offering. If you can, it's a reminder for those who have pledged to mail a check in to the church or go on the line and make a donation via the website. And any guests are more than welcome to also donate. If you are giving as a pledge, just make sure you let us know. And Jackson will play All Blues by Miles Davis. Jackson, we can't hear you. You're not muted, but we still can't hear you. It's very, very faint. It's still very, very faint. We had this problem last week, and you started out just fine. If you talk, can we hear? Is it coming through the microphone?
Test 1 2. I'm Crane.
Hmm.
Can you hear the mic okay?
Huh. I don't know. We can't hear you.
I can't turn up any louder.
Yeah, you're very, very, very faint.
Let me try to see if I can mess with my
wait, you just came in louder. I don't know. You got maybe a strange connection. See, as your
test
piano?
1 2.
Yeah, there you are.
Okay, I'm checking everything and everything seems all right. I don't know if it's probably Zoom. There's no way. I am cranked as loud as I can. It'll be distorting.
Right.
Am I good?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right.
Play it while we got you.
Did it get quiet again?
Yep.
Oh man.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's move on. And you can maybe try to problem solve as we continue the service, and we'll come back. We'll come back to it.
Okay.
All right. So for part 3 of the story, but not yet, is Candace will read part 3 of the story.
Kelly, can we make a breakout room for Jackson and me? And then I could.
Yeah. Oh, that's an excellent idea. Hey, Dixie, can you set that up, and he can work on it with Brian and maybe do some problem solving? All right, so Candace, why don't you take it from part 3 of the story?
During the construction of his palace beneath the glass, the maker of miniatures paid several visits to the original toy palace and was startled by the vast building that towered almost to the height of his shoulders. The chairs in the council chamber were the size of his fists. Ever since his own work had taken its slight and necessary turn, his 2 apprentices had assumed the task of supplying furniture for the king's toy palace. And the master saw that it was good. They were well suited to large and striking effects. He had perhaps been unduly harsh in limiting them to elementary tasks in the days when such things concerned him. One day, while looking at a desk in the king's toy palace, the maker of miniatures fell into a reverie. It occurred to him, not without pride, that the entire palace he was now constructing beneath his glass, with its more than 600 rooms and its gardens and orchards, could be enclosed by the eye of a needle. But even as he sank deeply into his little world, he felt at the back of his mind a slight itching, as if he knew that his palace could not satisfy him for long. For such a feat, however arduous, was really no more than the further conquest of a familiar realm, the twilight realm of the world revealed by his glass. And he yearned for a world so small that he could not yet imagine it. As he worked on his palace, the craving grew in him, and he seemed to sense dimly, just out of reach beyond his inner sight, a farther kingdom. To others, he seemed a magician who brought the seen out of the unseen, but in fact, he worked wholly in the visible world. It was an ambiguous and elusive world, which vanished into the invisible as soon as the glass was removed. And yet it was a far cry from the purely invisible realm he sensed just beyond. And he longed to construct objects so small that they would escape the power of the mediating glass, remained submerged in the dark kingdom of the invisible. And so he set to work on his invisible kingdom with its walled cities and winding rivers, its forests of beech and fir, its copper mines and temple towers, its spoons and insects. By the end of a year, he had completed a single city. The city contained cobbled streets and market squares, baskets of grapes on the fruit sellers' stands, merchants' houses with pillared balconies overlooking courtyards, individual bottles in the glass blowers' shops. He felt tired and exhilarated, and as he imagined all that remained undone, stretching out before him like an immense adventure, he found himself wishing that he could reveal his work to someone, as he had once been able to do. The solitude of his task was never oppressive, but from time to time in the pauses of his day, he felt a touch of loneliness. The king no longer summoned him, and his apprentices had moved into an adjoining chamber and taken on apprentices of their own.
Thank you, Candace. So I know we had a few people join us once we had started the story. So to synopsize, we have, it's basically a fairy tale set a long time ago in a courtly kingdom where there is a maker of miniatures who works for the king, and he's an extraordinary craftsman, and he is extraordinary because he challenges himself, and he has challenged himself to make things smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point now where he feels that simply doing things that are invisible to, he was just doing things that were invisible to the naked eye, but you could see them with magnification. But now he has sunk completely into the invisible world, making things that you can't, they're so small you can't see them at all. So in thinking about this service today, I discovered that there is indeed an entire online community devoted to making tiny food. Yes. And so we're going to pause and have a little reflection and watch someone make a tiny pancake. Clyde, you want to bring that up? It only takes a couple of minutes. So are you all hungry? Yes. Just go onto YouTube and Google miniature food, and you will be astounded that there's risotto, there's crepes, there's layer cakes, and then there's a subset of this community that actually then feeds the tiny food to things like hamsters, and you get to watch them eat it, or turtles, or so our obsession with miniatures continues on in the 21st century. So for the last part of the story, the conclusion of the story, Doug McCallie will read it for us. Doug?
Sure. One afternoon, when he was deep sunk in his invisible kingdom, there was a rap at the door of his chamber. The door opened to admit two new apprentices. They began by apologizing for disturbing the master at work, but explained that they had long admired his unsurpassed art and could not resist the desire to pay their respects. Their own work was still crude and trifling. They had scarcely the skill to fashion the leg of a table, and they hoped the visit to the master would instruct and inspire them. The master knew at once that the apprentices were very sure of themselves and were belittling themselves only out of courtly politeness. But the loneliness of his last months was soothed by their words of homage. Giving way to temptation, he moved aside to permit them to view his kingdom through the glass. True, they would be able to see nothing, for he had dropped fully below the floor of the visible. But perhaps they could somehow sense, as he could in the darkest depths of his mind, the splendor and the precision of his invisible art. The first apprentice bent over the glass, and in the top of the first apprentice bent over the glass in the top of his teakwood box. After a few moments, he stepped aside and allowed the second apprentice to bend over the glass. When both had done looking, the younger of the two said the master's work was indeed incomparable. Never in his short life had he seen anything so remarkable in both conception and execution. At once, the second apprentice gave voice to his admiration, saying even in his dreams, he had not dared to imagine the presence of so great an accomplishment. Then the two apprentices thanked the master for dignifying them with his attention and respectfully took their leave. The maker of the miniatures, knowing that they had seen nothing, that their words were hollow, and that they would never visit him again, returned with some impatience to his work. And as he sank below the crust of the visible world into his dazzling kingdom, He understood that he had traveled a long way from the early days, and that he still had far to go, and that from now on, his life would be difficult and without forgiveness.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you. And there the story ends. I'm wondering if Jackson, are you with us? Can you, is your music working? Can we hear a little Miles Davis now?
I'm sensing your presence. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm gonna try it out.
All right. Thank you, Jackson. That was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So we put up a poll here, and we have about half of the people have taken it about the story, and it looks like that the question for those who can't, well, perhaps on the phone, the question is, did you find the artist admirable, crazy, both, or neither? And it's interesting. 31%.
Kelly, sorry to interrupt. It's a little hard to hear you.
Oh, now it's happening to me.
Zoom is non-discriminating this morning.
Oh my goodness, the poltergeist. I know, it's so funny. Here we are talking about perfection, and we're.
I can hear everybody just fine.
It can, oh, that's good.
Well, you were louder, Kelly, but right now it's not as loud as it was.
All right, how is it now? Am I coming in
Good.
louder?
That's good, yeah.
It seems like the same thing that's afflicting Jackson is afflicting me. I haven't done a thing. So okay, so we've got this poll, and it is saying that that about 32% believed that the artist was admirable. About 10% said, nah, he's just crazy. And more people are taking the poll. Things are shifting a bit. The majority of the people, 41%, said that he's both, that they think that he's both admirable and crazy. And 16% said, no, he's neither admirable nor crazy. And this is why I love this story, because like many wonderful pieces of art, it holds multiple truths that sometimes conflict directly with each other. You wouldn't be wrong to think that the artist was crazy. You wouldn't be wrong to think he was admirable. You wouldn't be wrong to think he was neither, because it's open for interpretation. Though apparently in looking up this story online and to professors that use it in their classes, the majority of their students find the miniaturist as crazy. So that's that generation. So let's see. Let me find. So I do think that indeed the artist is on a noble journey. I think that the author of the story has presented the artist as a visionary. He is striving for what no one else can see or even fathom. And it feels completely right to this artist. He is pushing himself and he is challenging everyone around him in the process. So pushing boundaries is part and parcel of classical art of Western civilization. Think about Mozart and Beethoven. They were revolutionary composers in their time. Any composer in the 21st century who wants to compose like Mozart or Beethoven would not be taken seriously, because modern composers are expected to find new challenges and to invent something new. And this idea of exploration in Western civilization is not just limited to art. It spills out into every endeavor. It's part and parcel of science, of any kind of exploration. Science has to keep discovering, keep exploring, keep pushing the limits. And part of the same culture, of course, is the pursuit of perfection. Perfection is an abstraction, yet it is still the goal of the many pursuits. And indeed, education that is built around testing goes hand in hand with the ideal of perfection. If you're testing something, it's about the perfect score. It's about the right answer and everything else is wrong. And here is where I find the shadow side of this story. First of all, this classical tradition is extremely elitist. The ability to fund a bevy of craftsmen to make extraordinary objects to please the king and his court is, of course, built on the backs of serfs, of people who are laboring intensely their whole lives, who do not get to enjoy any of this splendor. And the pursuit of perfection, in the case of this artist, is extremely solipsistic. It is really all about him and his desires. It is not the artist, once he dips below the crust of the visible world and isn't making things that are entirely invisible, it's not serving anyone except the artist and his ideas. It's not serving the king or even the other artisans. To be fair, sometimes it takes future generations to understand and reap the benefits of the visionary's work. But in this story, the artist ends all alone. So I grew up with a conflicted view of perfectionism. As a kid, I was crushed if I did not get a perfect test score or straight A's. And I was competitive too in the musical realm. I always wanted to be the first chair flute player. But I also intuitively understood that striving for perfection was a great way to kill the joy I had in doing something. My father was an engineer, and he was also an educator, and he wanted to teach me how to change tires and change the oil. He would enlist me, much against my protestations, in fixing some household plumbing issue, and he always strove to do a perfect job and entreated me to do the same thing. And my mantra to him was, "Nobody's perfect, Dad." Well, when I got to college, my love of classical music was challenged because it became hyper competitive. So I went to an Ivy League school, and there was plenty of cutler competition all the way around in all aspects of life. And I was considered a very good flute player there, but and when it came to the orchestra, there was little community, no fellow feeling, no esprit de corps, because every good player was a threat to another. And that's when I discovered improvisation. Once I gained the ability, it was so freeing to be able to make up music on the spot. It wasn't easy at first, and how I taught myself how to improvise after being trained as a classical musician, well, that's a whole other story. But I discovered that perfection is completely irrelevant when it comes to jazz and improvisation. This to me was a revelation. I could make music with joy, with abandon, and not have the constant nagging voice saying, "Don't screw it up, don't make a mistake, make sure you get every note right." And then I learned another lesson when I became a professional performer. As many of you know, I spent about 10 years traveling the country as half of a folk music duo. We would occasionally add new songs to our repertoire, but mostly our performances were pieces we knew very well. And when you performed the same songs night after night, our act became a well-oiled machine. But every once in a while, something would go completely wrong. We'd start in two different keys, or completely botch a passage, or obviously miss a cue. And when this first happened, I should say, I was mortified. Oh no, they think we're idiots. They will hate us. We're doomed. But as the song would come to a screeching halt and I peered into the eyes of the audience, I found they looked surprised, maybe a little worried, but not angry. Oh, I realized they're on our side. They're not against us. They're not judging us. And I discovered that I could take that situation and make something wonderful out of it. If I was completely humble and honest and laughed at myself, well, that complete failure became the most intimate part of the evening. And people then actually appreciated the mastery that I did have over my instruments even more by seeing that it was possible to completely botch it. Imperfection actually made for a better experience for all of us. And as I've thought about it a lot, I've discovered that making mistakes in a public way is one of the best ways to empower others to take risks and to be extravagantly human. And indeed, as we have learned with these Zoom services, we from the beginning, we were told to not worry about the glitches because they would happen. We just need to focus on progress and not perfection. So, like I said, this story has multiple truths. It champions the one who marches to the beat of a drummer no one else can hear. It is also a cautionary tale about obsession that can cut off our connection to our community. We need visionaries. We need extraordinary beauty. We also need to accept our own and each other's frailties, because as much as we need challenges, we need each other even more. So now is the time for our joys and concerns. And I'm going to ask Christine Linke to lead that for us.
Good morning. So this is our time for joys and concerns. You can share in the chat box a joy that you're having this week, or something, a worry that's on your mind. It can be a word or it can be a phrase. If you share that in your chat box, and then after we do our silent meditation, I'll summarize that for us. And just a gentle reminder that we don't respond to each other with our joys and concerns. It's just our opportunity to bear witness to what we're all feeling.
Okay, so I was gonna play on a different guitar, but I gotta play this on my son's guitar. Yay! Because the guitar, I think, was messing up my sound. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Blackbird sing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life you were only waiting for this moment to arise. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see. All your life you were only waiting for this moment to be free. Blackbird fly. Blackbird fly into the light of a dark black night. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life you were only waiting for this moment to rise. Blackbird fly. Blackbird fly into the light of a dark black night. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see. All your life you were only waiting for this moment to be free. You were only waiting for this moment to be free. You were only waiting for this moment to be free.
In our joys and concerns today, a lot of people shared. There is sorrow for a lost colleague, but there's also joy, joy to be able to see the grass and that maybe spring is coming. There are folks that see maybe the past months as an opportunity to reflect a little bit on imperfection and how that can also be a source of growth. There's gratitude for the message that Kelly is sharing, and that imperfection can actually be a gift. There's also some joy about family coming to visit, being able to see family, and gratefulness for health. So for all of these joys and concerns, and for anything that maybe you have in your mind and in your heart that you haven't shared, we hold each other in our hearts.
Thank you, Christine. So I decided to suspend with the headphones, and maybe you can hear me. You can hear me? All right. So thank you so much, Christine. So our closing words come from a great writer, another writer, Octavia Butler, who is a science fiction writer, one of the only science fiction writers to be awarded a MacArthur Genius Grant. And she says, first, forget inspiration. Habit is more dependable. Habit will sustain you whether you're inspired or not. Habit will help you finish and polish your stories. Inspiration won't. Habit is persistence in practice. And we will extinguish the chalices with that in mind. In the spirit of good habit, not in pursuit of perfection, but of persistence and practice. Let us extinguish this chalice, and may the light of inspiration and humility glow within us all. So I've asked Jackson, before he launches into the prelude, to speak a little bit about the composer. Jackson?
Okay, so I guess one of my favorite things about Fats Waller is his connection to his community, and he's a very influential piano player. And one of the things, if you don't know much about Fats Waller, is he started out playing in movie theaters. So when they had silent films, that style of playing, ragtime and early 20th century jazz, kind of was a combination of a few different things, but one of them was taking thematic movie background music. And so a lot of those piano players, including some of the later ones even, know how to play that style of movie theater music. But he is also very well known for playing at what they used to call rent parties. And so in Harlem back in the 20s, people were trying to get money together to pay the rent. They would have a few, it's crazy. It'd be like having, like, I don't know, like John Legend playing your house so you can pay the rent, and they'd have a party and people would come in and pay for booze, or like donate money to, they have like a cover charge or something. I'm not exactly sure. It probably depend on what the party was like, but they would have a few amazing world-class piano players, and one of them was him. And that's the town he's from is Harlem. That's where he's kind of known for coming from. So he's probably the most stylistically recognizable if you're into stride piano. He's not considered the best, but I would consider him the second best of his time. So he's my favorite, though. Oh, but no, actually my favorite's James P. Johnson, his mentor, but he's my second favorite then. Here you go.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jackson. That was great. And my apologies. I'm getting some messages from folks saying my sound was terrible throughout the service until I took off the headphones. So I'm sorry about that. It's so hard. It's weird, you know. In Zoom, you really can't tell you're not coming through. So that's a lesson for us all to learn. Next time you hear bad audio, just interrupt me. It's fine. Otherwise, I have no idea. And it's really hard to read people's faces on Zoom too, to know that it's not coming through. So, well. So, are there any announcements? None were typed in the chat box during the postlude. Are there any announcements anybody wants to make?
Kelly, I have one.
Yes, go for it, Mary Beth.
Thank you. So the Called Ministry Task Force has 3 different small group meetings planned for this week. I heard from many of you who would like to be in a group, and I have set those times and dates up according to the people's schedules who have responded. But we have 3, starting with one on Tuesday morning, and then we have one on Thursday evening and one on Friday afternoon of this coming week. If you'd like to be a part of the small group discussion in regard to calling Reverend Christina as our settled minister, please just call, text, or respond here in the chat box, and we can put you into one of those groups.
Thank you, Mary Beth.
Mary Beth, I have in my notes something about Wednesday.
Yes, I'm sorry. It's Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. Thank you.
All right. Well, if there are no other announcements, I want to thank everybody for coming. Especially want to thank Brian and Jackson for providing wonderful music. I want to thank Pat and Candace and Doug for reading the story. And I want to thank Christine Linke and Clyde Wolper and the incomparable Dixie Morrow for being our ushers this morning. This service will be posted on YouTube along with the other services where you can find them. If you missed a service, you can always find it on the YouTube page of our congregation. And next week, we'll have our minister, Christina Church, will be talking about community means strength. So now is a time for us to go into our social time with the breakout rooms. And if you don't want to stay for a breakout room, this is a good time for you to leave the meeting. And that way we can make sure we have all of our breakout rooms are full with folks, because we're all randomly distributed by the number of people who are in the room at the time. And we'll be in the breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. And then anybody after that 10 minutes who wants to stick around and chat some more is welcome to. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kelly. Your sound wasn't that imperfect. I was able to hear you fairly nicely. So everything really was consistent in this service. And
okay, well, yes. It is hard, that whole balance of tempering, wanting to do a good job without not getting hung up on them.
And another fun fact, Zoom has now alphabetized our participant list.
Oh.
Yes, and it puts the host and co-host at top, and then everybody else is listed alphabetically underneath, which may make a change up in who's in the breakout rooms together today. So we'll see. I have to make one little adjustment here. And that's done. And so here we go. See you all later.
impact of it until it was read out loud, you know, really.
Mm-hmm.
And it did make a lot of sense. But it's funny how everybody could see it kind of differently as far as what the, you know, the overall view of the